That access road is community infrastructure now. And frankly, your little drain field is squatting under it. You'll want to relocate it before we pour the curbing. That was Brenda Coyle, president of the Pinecrest Ridge Homeowners Association for 9 years running, standing on a strip of fresh gravel that had been my pasture lane 2 weeks before. She said it the way a person says something they have repeated to themselves until it sounds like law. The road she was pointing at ran straight over my septic line. The land under it was mine, deeded, surveyed, and recorded long before her association existed. What she did not know, what she never once thought to check in 3 years of letters and fines and golf cart patrols, was that the man she was lecturing had spent 26 years as a licensed land surveyor, and that the easement she thought gave her that road had been written by my own hand for a purpose that had nothing to do with paving. So let me ask you something before I tell you the rest. If someone built a road across your own ground, on top of the pipe carrying waste away from your house, and then handed you the bill to move your pipe out of their way, what would you have done? Sit with that a minute. I will tell you what I did, and it took a while, because the right answer is rarely the fast one. My name is Walter Hans, 61 years old, and for most of my working life, I walked other people's property lines for a living. I retired from the county survey office and took up the 43 acres my wife and I bought in the foothills back when the road in was still dirt and the nearest streetlight was a county away. 11 of those acres are flat-bottom land along a seasonal creek. The rest climbs into pine and granite. We bought it in pieces, the lower bench first and then the timbered slope behind it 2 years later when the old rancher next door needed cash for a new well. And I surveyed all of it myself before I ever signed. Because I have seen too many people buy a corner that turns out to belong to someone else. We built the house ourselves over 2 summers. I framed it and Lorna fed the carpenters and then learned to swing a hammer better than half of them. She did the tile work in the kitchen with her own hands, a backsplash of small blue and cream squares she cut on a wet saw in the driveway. Every piece set while she hummed something with no name. There is a spot near the window where the grout is a shade off because she ran out of the first batch and the second never quite matched. And she left it that way on purpose, because she said a house should show that hands made it. She is buried now on the rise behind the orchard where she asked to be. Under a flat granite stone I cut and lettered myself, and I can see it from the porch when the leaves are down. I live there with my granddaughter, Posey, who is 15 and came to stay with me 3 years ago after her mother, my daughter, took a contract job overseas that kept getting extended. Posey keeps the chickens, 11 hens, and a bad-tempered rooster she named Mr. Pickles. And she films the deer that come down to the creek at dusk on a phone she keeps in a waterproof case clipped to her belt. She reminds me to eat when I forget, which is more often than I would like to admit. And she has a way of going quiet and watchful when something is wrong that I have learned to trust like a barometer. When you survey land for 26 years, you learn that the ground does not lie, and people do. Not always on purpose. Mostly they just repeat what the last person told them and never walk it themselves. A fence built 60 years ago in the wrong spot becomes, to 3 generations of owners, the gospel boundary. Until somebody pulls the corner and finds the iron pipe 11 feet the other way. I have stood in a lot of kitchens and told a lot of people that the strip of yard they mowed every Saturday for 30 years was never theirs. And I learned to say it gently, because it is a hard thing to hear that the ground under your feet is not the shape you thought. I kept records the way a surveyor keeps records, which is to say obsessively. Every plat I ever filed, every field book, every easement I drafted, copied and bound and dated and shelved in the survey shed in archival boxes I label by year. My field books are the green canvas kind, and I number them in sequence, and I have 91 of them going back to my first season as a chainman. When we bought the Foothill place, I pulled the chain of title back 110 years. Through 4 owners and 1 tax sale and a probate that took a decade to clear. And I walked every corner myself, set my own pins, capped them with my own license number, and drew my own map. I knew where my septic line ran because I designed the system, sized the tank, laid out the leach field on a contour that would drain in the wet season, and logged the trench with measurements off 2 fixed points before we backfilled it. That is not bragging. That is just the habit of a man who measures things for a living, and it is the whole reason this story ends the way it does. The trouble started the spring the developer finished the cul-de-sac at the top of our shared lane. Pinecrest Ridge had been a sleepy cluster of 8 houses up the hill from me, and the homeowners association that governed them was, for years, 3 retired couples and a potluck. They had a covenant nobody enforced and a treasury that bought folding tables. I knew most of them to wave at. Then a builder named Garrett Coyle bought the last undeveloped tract at the ridge top, the old rancher's high ground, platted it into 19 lots, and married the woman who would run the board that approved his every request. Brenda Coyle became president at the same season her husband broke ground. And within a month, the Potluck Association had a logo, a lawyer on retainer, and a fee schedule. I did not think much of it at the time. People build. I had built too, and I was not in the business of telling other folks what to do with their own dirt. The first letter came in May. It was printed on cream paper with a little embossed pine cone in the corner, the kind of stationery that costs more than the postage. And it informed me that my mailbox was non-compliant with community aesthetic standards and that I had 30 days to replace it with an approved model from an approved vendor. My mailbox is a galvanized box on a cedar post that I set in concrete myself. And it sat at the county road, 400 feet below the lowest Pinecrest lot, on land that had never been part of any association in its 110-year recorded history. I read the letter twice at the kitchen table, and then I filed it in a manila folder I labeled with the date and the word Pinecrest. And I drove up the hill to introduce myself, because that is what a neighbor does before he does anything else. Brenda met me at the gate of her half-built house in a linen blazer and white canvas sneakers that had never seen dirt, a clipboard against her hip, even though it was a Saturday, and there was nothing to inspect. I introduced myself, told her I was the fellow down at the county road, and that I had gotten her letter. I told her, politely, mug still in my hand, that my place was not in her association, that I had the deed and the recorded plat to show it, and that I was happy to walk the line with her any afternoon she liked, and show her exactly where her authority stopped and my ground began. She smiled the way you smile at a slow child who has wandered into the adult's conversation. "Mr. Huntz," she said, "we're all functionally part of the same community up here, and the board has determined that the lower parcel falls within our area of concern." Area of concern. I wrote that phrase down word for word in the truck before I forgot the exact shape of it, because a surveyor learns that the precise words matter, in deeds and in people. I did not raise my voice. I thanked her for her time. I had learned a long time ago that the man who keeps his voice level is usually the man holding the better paper, and that the surest way to lose is to give an angry woman a story about the angry man who yelled at her gate. That was incident 1. I dated it, noted the witnesses, which were none but myself, and filed it. The second came in July, a notice of fine, $75, for the same mailbox, plus a new citation for an unapproved outbuilding, which was my survey shed, which sat 200 feet inside my own property, where I keep my instruments and my files. The shed has a concrete floor I poured, and a wood stove and shelves of those green field books, and it is the closest thing I have to a church. I had not paid the first fine because there was nothing to pay. The association had no jurisdiction over my land, no recorded covenant running with my title, and no lien rights against a parcel that had never been annexed into their development. I knew that the way I knew my own name. I also knew that a fine ignored becomes a story told later, the kind where a reasonable board tried, and the difficult old man simply would not engage. So I wrote a calm letter citing my deed book and page, enclosed a stamped copy of my recorded plat, asked them to identify the recorded instrument that placed my land under their authority, and sent the whole thing certified with return receipt. I kept the green card when it came back, signed by someone in their office with a looping hand. Incident 2. Filed. Posey asked me that summer why I did not just call a lawyer and make them stop. We were on the porch shelling peas into a steel bowl. And the question was honest, the way 15-year-olds are honest before the world teaches them to hedge. I told her that a lawyer was a tool, and you do not reach for a tool before you understand the job. I told her that right then my job was to collect, to let the other side keep talking and keep writing, because every letter they sent that claimed authority they did not have was a brick I could stack later, and a brick they handed me for free. She thought about that, rolling a pea between her fingers, and then a few days later, she started a folder of her own, a spiral notebook with a horse on the cover where she wrote down the dates the white golf cart came down our lane and idled at the property line, and the times, and once a license plate. I did not ask her to. She just did it, in her small, careful print, and she titled the first page with the word evidence, and underlined it twice. She is her grandmother's child. By the end of that first year, the folder was thick enough to need a rubber band. 7 letters. 3 fines totaling $210. None of them paid. None of them lawful. 1 visit from a man in an orange vest and a lanyard, who called himself a compliance inspector and turned out to be Garrett Coyle's nephew with a clipboard and no certification of any kind. He came on a weekday afternoon and started taking photographs of my shed and my fence line from the lane. And when I walked down, he told me he was conducting a compliance walkthrough and that I would need to grant him access to inspect the outbuilding. I met him at my gate, leaned on the post, and asked him for his inspector credentials, the state license number, anything with a seal. He patted his vest pockets like the number might be in one of them, said he would have his office send it over, and decided he had somewhere else to be. I photographed his truck and the magnetic sign on its door, which read, Ridge Compliance Services, and peeled at one corner so the white showed through. I noted the time, the date, the plate, and the fact that the truck was registered, when I later checked, to Garrett Coyle's construction company. Incident 11. Filed. The day and time stamp is something I cannot shake even now. Tuesday, just after 9 in the morning, the second spring, was when the surveyors came. Not my kind. A crew Garrett had hired, 2 young men with a total station and a pickup, setting stakes along my lower lane. I walked down with my coffee and watched them work for a while from the shade of the big oak before I said anything, because I wanted to see what line they thought they were running and where they thought their control points were. They were running it straight down the center of my pasture lane, the one that crosses my septic field, and they had a set of plans rolled under the passenger seat that called the lane a dedicated access easement for the benefit of the Pinecrest Ridge development. 22 feet of right-of-way, where I knew for a certainty the recorded width was 12. I watched the younger one set a lath with a pink ribbon dead in line with my clean-out riser, 4 feet above where the pipe ran, and something in my chest went very quiet and very cold. Now here is the thing I had not told them, and had not yet told Brenda, and am telling you now because the whole story turns on it. There was an easement across my lower acres. I knew there was, because I was the one who had drafted it 18 years earlier. as a favor to the old rancher who owned the ridge top before any of this. His name was Amos, and he was 80-some and running a few dozen head, and he needed a way to move cattle down to the creek in the dry months when his upper ponds went to dust. So I wrote him a narrow stock easement, 12 feet wide for the passage of livestock and ranch vehicles only, expiring on the transfer or conversion of his ranch to any non-agricultural use. I wrote that termination clause in myself, in plain words, because Amos asked me to make sure it could never become anything but a cow path. Said he did not want some future buyer turning his handshake into a highway. I recorded it myself at the county office. I knew its exact metes and bounds because they were in my own field book in my own hand. Book 63, page 41. It was not a road easement. It could not be widened, paved, or used for a subdivision. And by its own plain terms, it had already extinguished itself the day Garrett Coyle bought Amos out and platted that ranch into building lots. They were staking a right that had died the moment the cows left, and they were doing it over my sewer. I did not tell the crew that. There is no profit in showing your hand to the help. I asked them, friendly, mug in hand, who had ordered the survey. And the older one said the Homeowners Association through Mr. Coyle's office. I asked, just curious, if I could see the plans, and he let me look across the open passenger door. Because I looked like a harmless old man with a coffee mug in a slow morning. I read enough to memorize the easement reference they were citing, the book and page, and I saw that it was mine. And I thanked them kindly and walked back up to the house and filed a note with the time and what I had seen. Then I called the county surveyor's office, where I had worked for 2 decades and trained half the staff, and asked a young woman named Tess to pull the recorded easement and the original ranch deed and the Coyle plat and hold certified copies for me. Tess had been my chainman her first 2 summers out of school before she got her own license. She did not even ask why. She said she would have them by lunch and that it was good to hear my voice. The fines kept coming, but now they had a shape. Brenda's letters stopped pretending to be about mailboxes. The 4th letter that spring, on the same cream paper, demanded that I grant the association formal access to maintain and improve the lane, and warned that failure to cooperate would result in legal action to enforce the easement and recover the association's costs. Improve. That one word told me everything I needed to know about what was coming. You do not improve a stock path unless you mean to pour concrete on it. I wrote back, certified, polite as a deacon, and asked them to identify the recorded instrument they relied upon by book and page, and to provide the legal description of the easement they claimed. 3 weeks later, they sent me the book and page, and it was my easement, book 63, page 41, the one I had written for Amos and his cattle. They were citing my own document back at me in a threatening letter, without ever having read past its title to the clause that killed it. I sat with that letter a long time. A man could almost feel sorry for people that incurious if they were not standing on his sewer. Posey came in from the chicken run the morning the gravel trucks arrived and said, "Grandpa, there are dump trucks on the lower lane." It was a Thursday, early, the lights still gray, and the grass wet. I went down in my barn coat, and there it was. They had not waited for a court. They had not waited for my cooperation or my answer or anything else. Brenda had decided that possession would settle the matter, that an old man would not fight a finished road, that concrete poured is concrete kept. Over 2 days, they spread 60 tons of crushed rock down my pasture lane, 22 feet wide, where the easement allowed 10 extra feet of my pasture buried on each margin, directly over the bed where my septic line ran 4 feet down and over the leach field that fanned out beside it. They graded it, crowned it for drainage, and set wooden forms for curbing along both edges. A finished private road, built in 2 days, on another man's ground, over another man's sewer, without a permit or a court order or a single lawful thing to stand on. And then Brenda came down the new gravel in her white golf cart to tell me, standing on my own buried pipe, that my drain field was squatting under community infrastructure. I want to be honest about what I felt, because I think you have felt it too. It was not panic. It was a kind of cold settling, the way the air goes still before weather. My hands were steady. I had been waiting 3 years for them to do something that could not be walked back. And they had finally done it. The road was the mistake. The road was 60 tons of evidence that they had trespassed, destroyed a recorded utility, and built a structure on land they did not own under color of an easement that no longer existed. Brenda, I said, and I kept my voice as level as a transit bubble, you've paved over my septic line. She laughed. She actually laughed. It's an easement, Walter. We have every right. If your sewage pipe is in the way, that's your problem to solve, and I'd solve it quickly, because the curbing goes in Monday. That was the 3rd time I had heard her claim that authority to my face in 3 different places, and I had a witness for each one. The gate, the half-built house, and now the road. I thanked her, which confused her, and walked back up the hill. Here is where the patience pays off. And I want you to watch how little drama it took. I did not yell. I did not stand in front of a dump truck or chain myself to a form board. I did 3 things over the next 9 days. Calmly, in order, the way you run a closure on a survey, point by point until the figure ties out. First, I called the county, not the sheriff, the environmental health department. A septic line is not a garden hose. It is a permitted sewage disposal system regulated by the state, and burying one under 60 tons of rock with proposed curbing on top is not a neighbor dispute over a fence. It is a violation of state health code and the destruction of a permitted system. And it is the kind of thing that has its own statutes and its own inspectors and its own teeth. I had the original septic permit in my folder, dated, signed, with the as-built diagram I had drawn myself showing the tank, the line, and the leach field tied to 2 fixed monuments. A health inspector named Raymond came out on a Monday morning. The same Monday the curbing was supposed to go in a county truck with a clipboard of his own, the real kind. I walked him down and showed him the permit and showed him where the line ran under the gravel. And when he matched my as-built to the ground and understood that there was a finished road and pending curbing sitting on top of a permitted drain field, he stopped to the curbing crew on the spot with a written order and stapled a copy to the form lumber. Brenda arrived in her golf cart 20 minutes later to find a county truck parked across her road, and a man in a county shirt telling her contractor to load the forms back on the trailer. This is private community infrastructure, she told Raymond, chin up. And that was voiced moment 4, in front of a county official and my granddaughter, who had walked down and was filming quietly from the orchard rise the way she had learned to. Raymond, who did not care one way or the other about her community, asked her for the permit authorizing construction over a registered septic system. She did not have one. He asked her for the recorded instrument granting the association the right to build a road there at all. She told him to call her attorney, which is what people say when they have run out of paper. Second, I went to see Tess at the county recorder's office with my field book under my arm, book 63, the green cover soft with age. We laid 3 documents out on the long counter side by side under the fluorescent lights. The original ranch deed, the recorded stock easement in my own hand, and the developer's plat. The easement said 12 feet, livestock and ranch vehicles, terminating on conversion of the ranch to non-agricultural use, in language I had written so plainly that a child could follow it. The plat, signed by Garrett Coyle and approved by a board his wife chaired, converted the ranch to 19 residential lots, and it was dated, stamped, recorded. The instrument they had been standing on, threatening me with, citing in their letters, had extinguished itself by its own terms on the very day Garrett filed that plat. I did not have to argue it. There was nothing to argue. The document argued it, in my own handwriting, against a plat with his own signature on it. Tess made certified copies, embossed and sealed and stamped with the date, and I slid them into the folder behind the green card. Third, I learned why. Because a man does not pave a neighbor's septic line to save 400 feet of driveway. And a woman does not spend 3 years and a lawyer's retainer fighting over a mailbox. I pulled the Pinecrest Ridge development filings, which are public record, which anyone can walk in and get. And I read them at the same long counter, and I saw what the road was really for. Garrett's 19 lots had no legal access wide enough for a fire apparatus road, the all-weather 20-foot route the county requires before a developer can sell a single house in the foothills because of the fire danger. He had platted 19 lots without a way for a fire engine to reach them. The only route that worked, the only grade gentle enough and wide enough, ran down my pasture lane to the county road. Without my 12 feet illegally widened to 22 and paved into a road, his entire subdivision was landlocked and unsellable. 19 lots of beautiful view property that no bank would finance and no buyer could insure. The fines, the fake inspector, the letters, the road poured without permission in the gray of a Thursday morning. All of it was Garrett trying to manufacture an access road he had no legal right to, with his wife's board supplying the official-looking paper to make the theft look like governance. 19 lots, at the prices on his big sign at the Ridge entrance, came to just under $14 million. Every cent of it riding on a strip of gravel he had laid across another man's sewer. I want to tell you about the night in between, because it is the part Posey remembers. The association, sensing the ground shifting, escalated the only way bullies know how. Saturday evening, near dusk, a flatbed came down the lane with 2 men and a small excavator, and they began to dig at the edge of the road where my line ran, to, in Brenda's later words, relocate the obstruction. They were going to dig up my septic line themselves. Posey saw the lights from the kitchen and called me at the feed store in town, and her voice on the phone was not tidy. "Grandpa, there are men, with a digger, by the road. They're digging where you said the pipe is." Short, broken, frightened. I told her to stay in the house, lock the door, keep filming through the window, and not to go outside for any reason. I called the sheriff from the truck doing 50 on a gravel road. A deputy named Hollis was at my gate when I got there, headlights on the excavator, the 2 men standing in the open trench they had started. Hollis was not on anybody's side. He was a constrained man doing a constrained job, and he told me plainly that a property line dispute was civil, and he could not arrest anyone for digging on what they claimed was an easement. I had the certified copies in the truck. I laid the recorded easement and the plat on Hollis's hood, in the headlights, and I showed him the termination clause and the plat that triggered it. And I showed him the county health order taped to the form lumber forbidding construction over the septic system. Hollis read it twice. Then he turned to the 2 men in the trench and told them to shut the machine off and step out, because they were now digging up a permitted sewage system in direct violation of a written county order, and that was not civil anymore. That was the night it turned, not with a speech, with a piece of paper on the hood of a truck and a deputy who could read. The county moved faster than I expected, because health violations move faster than property suits. By Wednesday, the Environmental Health Department had issued a formal notice of violation to the Pinecrest Ridge Homeowners Association and to Garrett Coyle individually for destruction of a permitted septic system and unpermitted construction over it. The recorder's findings on the extinguished easement went into the county's file. And because the road had no legal basis, the county planning office pulled its provisional acceptance of Garrett's fire access route, which meant his 19 lots no longer had approved access, which meant he could not sell them, which meant the $14 million sitting on that gravel evaporated in a single afternoon. There was a public hearing, because there is always a public hearing, and that is where the last of it played out. The County Planning Commission met in a low brick building with folding chairs, and the room was full, because word travels in foothills. Brenda came in a fresh blazer with a binder of her own and a lawyer beside her. She stood up when her item was called and told the commission that the association had acted in good faith on a valid recorded easement and that the lower parcel was, functionally, part of the Pinecrest community. The fifth time, I had now heard her say it at my gate, at her house, on my road, to a health inspector, and to a county commission. Every one of them recorded, dated, in the folder or on Posey's footage. When it was my turn, I did not make a speech. I am not built for speeches, and the document did not need my help. I walked to the podium with the folder, and I laid 3 things in front of the commission. The recorded stock easement in my own hand, 12 feet, livestock only, terminating on conversion. The developer's plat converting the ranch to 19 lots, signed by Garrett, dated the day the easement died. And the original septic permit with my as-built diagram, showing the line that now lay under 60 tons of their rock. I said quietly that I had drafted the easement myself 18 years ago for cattle, that it had ended itself the day the cattle became cul-de-sacs, and that everything built on it had been built on nothing. Then I stepped back and let them read. The chair of the commission, a woman with reading glasses on a chain, read all 3. She looked at Brenda's lawyer. She asked him to identify any recorded instrument granting the association a road easement across the Hans parcel. He could not, because none existed, because the only one that had ever existed was the one I wrote, and it was dead. She asked Brenda whether the association had obtained a permit to construct over a registered septic system. Brenda said the easement covered it. The chair said an easement is not a permit, and that even a valid easement, which this was not, would not authorize destroying a permitted sewage system. Then she made her ruling, plain, into the microphone. And it is the only quoted line from that room I will give you, because it is the one that mattered. The commission finds no legal access exists for the Pinecrest Ridge development across the Hans property, and directs the association to remove the unpermitted road and restore the septic system at its own expense. I did not smile. I want you to know that. There was a teenager in the 3rd row filming her grandfather, and I was not going to give that footage a single ounce of gloat. I folded my papers and I sat down. Here are the paired numbers, because they are the heart of it, and I had been keeping both columns for 3 years. On my side, one easement recorded 18 years prior, 12 feet wide, in my own hand. 0 fines lawfully owed. $0 I ever paid them. 1 septic permit, dated and as built. On their side, 60 tons of rock removed at their cost. A road restoration estimated at over $40,000. A destroyed septic remediation on top of it. 19 lots rendered unsellable. Just under $14 million in inventory frozen. And a health violation on the association's record and on Garrett's name personally. They had spent 3 years and a great deal of money to build a road that cost them everything and gained them nothing. On land that was mine the whole time. Over a pipe they were told was there. The consequence fell exactly where their own actions pointed it. Garrett's development could not proceed without legal access, and the only access ran across the parcel he had spent 3 years antagonizing the owner of. And that owner now had a county finding, a recorder's determination, and a planning ruling all on file against him. He did not flood the way some of these stories go, but he drowned just the same, in the slow water of his own paperwork. The bank that had financed the lots called the note when the access failed. The lots that had been listed at prices fit for a billboard quietly came off the market. The association removed the road over the following month. And I will tell you, it was a strange satisfaction to stand at my gate with a mug and watch the same kind of trucks that brought the rock come back and haul it away, load by load, 60 tons of somebody else's bad idea, leaving my pasture a scoopful at a time. When the lane was bare dirt again, Raymond came back out and stood with me while my own contractor, a careful man named Pete, dug down and exposed the septic line, which was crushed flat in 2 places where the heaviest equipment had crossed it. The pipe folded like a drinking straw. Pete cut out the bad sections and laid new line and bedded it in proper gravel. And every dollar of that repair, just over $9,000 on top of the 40-some for the road removal, was billed to the association under the county order. The lane is grass again now, reseeded, and the deer have come back to it. The pins I set are still where I set them, capped and true, because the ground does not move, even when people wish it would. Brenda was not annihilated. I want to be careful here because the story is not that she was destroyed. She lost the presidency at the next association meeting because the other homeowners up the hill, the 3 retired couples and the families who had bought into Garrett's lots, finally understood that her crusade had frozen their property and their husband's money. One of those board members, a quiet man named Doyle, who had voted for every one of her motions, came down to my gate after it was over and stood there a while before he spoke. He said he had never read the easement. He said none of them had. He said they trusted her when she told them it was all in order, and he was sorry. And he handed me a copy of the board minutes where she had assured them, in writing, that the legal review was complete. There never was a legal review. That was the conscience defector's gift, quietly given, and I filed it too, because you never know. Posey was at the gate when Doyle came, and after he left she leaned on the post next to me and looked down at the bare lane where the road had been. She did not say anything clever. She just said, "You were right to wait." I told her waiting was not the point. The point was that I had walked the line and they never did. The point was the field book. The point was that I knew where my own pipe was buried because I logged it before I covered it, 18 years before any of them showed up to pave over it. We stood there a while in the last of the light, the 2 of us, on the ground her grandmother and I had measured with our own feet. And then we went up and I made her eat something. So here is the lesson, plain. Because I promised you one at the start, and because it is the only reason I tell these stories at all. If you own land, walk it. Walk every corner, find your pins, and if you cannot find them, hire a licensed surveyor to set them, because the ground does not lie, and you want to know the truth before someone else tells you a false one. Pull your own deed and read it, the whole chain. Not just the page the title company hands you. If there is an easement across your land, read it to the last word, because easements have terms and conditions and expiration triggers, and most people who claim one have never read past its name. Keep a folder. Date everything. When a clipboard authority sends you a letter claiming power, it does not have. Do not argue and do not pay. Just answer in writing. Ask them to cite the recorded instrument and file their answer. Because the day they overreach onto something that cannot be undone, that folder is the thing that wins, quietly, without a single raised voice. If you have ever had a clipboard show up at your gate and tell you that your own land was somehow part of their concern, I would like to hear about it, so leave it in the comments and tell me how it went. If these stories are worth your evening, subscribe and I will keep telling them. And next time, I will tell you about the woman 3 valleys over who tried to charge a rancher for the rainwater that fell on his own mountain until he showed her the water decree his great-grandfather filed in 1911. Until then, walk your lines and keep your folder close.